necessarily a natural fit, Jimmy Carter and Congress. He had run as an outsider, as we have said. He ran against the Democratic establishment, and he meant that. Even though, of course, he had a majority support in Congress, he didn't like, backroom deals. He didn't want to schmooze his way to curry favor. He wasn't interested in the whining and dining of lawmakers that is part of the Washington game. He wasn't going to play that game. And it meant that there were moments of conflict with members of his own party here in Washington. He did, of course, have some big legislative achievements. Of course, his energy policy. In many ways, he was ahead of his time. He did also, of course, create the Departments of Energy and Education. And David, we will hear shortly, as the casket arrives here and makes its way up to the Capitol Rotunda, we will also see some of the living survivors of his administration, including the Secretaries of Treasury, Labor, Health, and Education, those who worked so closely with Jimmy Carter, David.
He did outlive many members of his cabinet. It's been so long since the Carter administration. Mary, thank you for pointing out those who will be here to remember the president. Sort of feed of volume, if you will, but I wanted you to hear it for yourself here for a moment. The procession making its way to the Capitol Plaza. The United States Army Band, as the former president returns to Washington, mirroring the route from Inauguration Day in 1977. He was a lifelong Democrat, though he would say through the years that he didn't always completely feel as though he fit in with the liberal end of the party. Wasn't a Republican, but considered himself conservative in many respects. You really couldn't singularly define Jimmy Carter, at least when it came to his politics. Although Mary Bruce makes a very good point here that in recent months he was running for president, Vice President Kamala Harris. He did see she was defeated by Donald Trump, who has been reelected, obviously, to the presidency. Donald Trump will be there at the funeral on Thursday with every former living president. And as we were saying, Deborah, earlier, former President Jimmy Carter knew well what defeat feels like. He also knew the importance of peaceful transfer of power. He talked in the early years of the Trump presidency about how difficult, how tough the press was on Donald Trump. He felt the wrath of the press himself when he was president, though ultimately he was deeply critical in the end of the Trump administration. There were moments, though, when he tried to reach out to Donald Trump, offer his own thoughts on policy, and did relate to him in those early years about how tough the press was on an incoming president. But he did survive through another election. He cast his vote. And now what we're seeing today with the funeral is what we'll see in the next couple of days, again, with the peaceful transfer of power, these signs, moments of service.
He knew how to sort of make those deals. He knew how to sort of make those deals in a very open way, but also one that suited his conscience. And he was not going to go back on that, but yet he had to deal with that in the world of politics. And I think that was something he uniquely understood, David.
Peter Thomas, as Deborah points out, not outwardly an activist, but really a politician and an elected president with a plan once he got into the White House. And he did make history with a number of appointments when it came to women and to people of color. And that was part of his legacy, making progress from presidents who had come before him, significant progress in that respect. And till the very end talked about equality. That you can have equality and you can also have a very deep faith.
Indeed, David, appointing more women and people of color, black people, to the bench than any presidents before him combined. And David, as a son of the South, I can recall my parents talking about Jimmy Carter as a person from the South and how robust as some people wanted him to, but they said he's
for the family, but her honesty about how difficult that really was for the family, and we can only imagine when families give it their all in these races for the White House, what it is like, particularly when you're a first-term president hoping to serve a second term. But to see the Carter family behind the hearse here today, returning to Washington all these years later, it must feel full circle for them, and perhaps a bit of respect long overdue for a man who really was devoted to his country for many decades beyond the presidency.
That's exactly what they think. And, Kim Fuller, who was just on, Billy Carter's daughter, Jimmy's niece, she's now taking up Jimmy's role in the Maranatha Church, and she does Sunday school where her uncle used to do it. She's very well known in the community, and it was, that town of 573 people, everyone knows everybody there, right? And so you have a new Secret Service agent in town, and the phones start ringing, it's that kind of a small place where everyone knows everyone, including every single one of the Carters. And even if, no matter what political party you're from, you kind of admire, right? Even if, no matter what political party you're from, you kind of admire, right?
No question. I think that the tally, the number in the end, because of the years and years of working with Habitat for Humanity, both Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, that in the end, I think that he had touched some 4,400 homes himself with his tool belt, let alone the homes he helped build all over the country by just being part of that organization. That more than 4,000 homes he was there himself for the building of. And for those who are joining our coverage in progress here, ABC's live coverage as the nation celebrates Jimmy Carter, Mary Jordan, the family, the extended Carter family, but Jimmy Carter went home all these years. He lived in Plains, Georgia, in the same home that he and Rosalind had purchased before the presidency, a very small, humble, modest home. And I loved how you just said, when there's a new Secret Service agent in town, everybody knows they pick up the phone, there's somebody new here. 500 people. That speaks volumes, and it's so unlike, and without casting judgment, it's just so unlike what we see now in this country, to have a first right up until the end. I think people should know this, that they would stay on that Murphy bed, they'd pull it down and say, look at all the extra room we have in that small little apartment. And I think in these times when people, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, independent of this country, and such a debate over economic hardship and people feeling seen or heard, that in walking the walk all these years after they left the presidency, I think that's certainly a lasting lesson for the Carters, Lindsay.
And you talk about how they went back to this modest home in Plains, Georgia, prior to going to the White House. Early on in their marriage, when they just had the 3 boys at the time, they lived in and we talked about the love story between Rosalind and Jimmy Carter. We've talked about a few of the arguments that they had from time to time. Jimmy Carter has said that there was one argument that they had that endured for about 14 years, and that was if they were going to have another child, a 4th child. He wanted to go for a girl for number 4. Rosalind was not so much into that. In the end, he won, and the argument.
Do you have to say, though?
and so again, Amy, 9 years old when they entered the White House. But we've talked about the press coverage, and he has said that of his 48 months in office, 46 of it was bad press coverage. And we do know that he had that 34% approval rating by the time he concluded his presidency, among the lowest, tied actually with Donald Trump after his first term. But Walter Mondale, his vice president, who we're going to hear eulogize Jimmy Carter from the grave, as it were, on Thursday, because his son Ted is going to actually say the words that we championed human rights.
Championed human rights. And as we watch the casket carried to the Capitol, Lindsay, one of the things that Jimmy Carter was very proud of was that there wasn't combat during the Carter years, that they didn't have to take military action, although the key, obviously, foreign policy issue of that administration defined the final year of the presidency more than the final year. was the Iran hostage crisis, which we talked about earlier with Martha. And the anecdotes from Jimmy Carter himself, the diary that he would keep recordings, and in the final days of the presidency, those recordings would get shorter and shorter of them, and looked at himself in those final hours wondering, again, have I aged this much, or have I just not had sleep in many, many months, because he was so worried about the Americans being held in Iran. Turning the corner here, approaching the Capitol, and Mary Bruce, the country, I think, hungers, craves for these types of unified moments. There will be Democrats and Republican leaders inside the Capitol honoring a former president.
A moment for the country to come together, David, during these very divisive times politically, a moment to hit the pause button on all of that and remember a remarkable man with a really, truly remarkable legacy, both the work he did here in Washington during his 4 years in office, and then, of course, the tremendous work he did around the country and around the globe, and the example he set, I think, for everyone about the power of the post-presidency. David, you can now see here on the east front of the Capitol, you're seeing the beginning of the procession. You noted the casket turning here to the drive behind me. We are seeing some members of the public out here. David, I can't remember the last time Washington felt this solemn nature of the day for the country and for the family. And David, I am struck at how all of these events, and we've been discussing this one in particular, meticulously planned by the Carters themselves to share his story, remind everyone it was important to him, but also along the way in all of these events this week, they're using these events as an opportunity to thank those who worked alongside the family, who served with the former president. And so we are going to see here shortly living members of Carter's cabinet joining the family for this special moment, and they've made a point of making sure that some of the first people who will be able to pay their respects are those who worked with him in the White House and in Congress. David.
Mary, thank you. Let's listen.
Trying to hold back this feeling for so long.
Mary had mentioned earlier the former president outlived one of his grandchildren. They will be at the base of the Capitol steps.